Thank you. Thank you. My name's Tim, for any of you who don't know me. And today we're going to be continuing our series in John. I believe this is actually the last in the series for the moment, and obviously next week we've got Easter. So today we're going to be looking at John 10, 31 to 42. So let's start by reading that. If you've got a Bible or it's on your phone, just turn to it, or it's up on the screen there. Okay, so again his Jewish opponents picked up stones to stone him. But Jesus said to them, I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of these do you stone me? We are not stoning you for any good works, they replied, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. Jesus answered them, Is it not written in your law, I have said you are gods? If he called them gods, to whom the word God came, and Scripture cannot be set aside, what about the one whom the Father set apart, as his very own, and sent into the world? Why then do you accuse me of blasphemy, because I said I am God's Son? Do not believe me, unless I do the works of my Father. But if I do them, even though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me, and I in the Father. Again they tried to seize him, but he escaped their grasp. Then Jesus went back across the Jordan, to the place where John had been baptizing in the early days. There he stayed, and many people came to him. They said, Though John never performed a sign, all that John said about this man was true. And in that place many believed in Jesus. Okay, excellent. So I've really got three parts to this little message that I'm going to give today. I want to start by looking previously at what's happened in the book of John up until this point. You might notice that these few verses almost seem to be partway through a story. So we're going to understand how we got to this point in the story and why the Jewish authorities at the time were looking at stoning Jesus. Obviously we're going to be focusing on the passage in the middle, and then we're going to look a little bit about what next, or how can maybe I apply some of this to my life. So we're going to start with John. And I'm going to take us through a little bit of a timeline, a little bit of an understanding about maybe what John's Gospel is. So in John's Gospel, the first 12 chapters really describe Jesus' public ministry in and around Israel. And then the remaining chapters describe the closing days of his earthly ministry. Now we're going to be focusing on these first 12 chapters. And in that first element, really there are 7 core miracles that Jesus performs that are recorded in John. As we go through, I'll explain that there is a number of other miracles that are explained discussed in other Gospels, but in John there are 7 core miracles that have been investigated. So, I don't know about you, but sometimes I like to go onto Google Maps and I like to go into the timeline feature, and I like to see where I've travelled around as it plots everywhere we're going. So I'm going to kind of take the same approach, and we're going to take you on a little journey from the UK, where we are now, across to Israel, with Jerusalem near the Jordan. And we're going to travel back to 25 AD. And 25 AD was when Jesus really started his public ministry. And this is where the book of John starts. So, what did Israel look like in 25 AD? Well, here's a map. And we've got some key places on it. So just so you can see, there's Jerusalem right in the middle there. We've got Nazareth, which is where Jesus was kind of brought up and where he lived. And we've got the River Jordan that joins the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. So we're going to start just here on the River Jordan. And it was here on the River Jordan, or approximately here, that Jesus' ministry really started. And this is where Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. And John the Baptist said in the book of John, there's a couple of Johns here, I am not the Messiah, but I am sent ahead of him. Okay. And we'll come back to this a little bit later. But John the Baptist is preparing the way for Jesus' ministry. And we'll kind of pick up where this left off in a little bit later. Okay, but this is where his ministry started at the beginning of the book of John. Jesus then actually went off into the desert for 40 days. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And just on your map, it was a little bit south by the Dead Sea, and that's probably where Jesus would have gone. Okay. After that, after he'd been there for 40 days, he came back, and he came back to the River Jordan, where John was baptizing, that area. And that's where the first disciples joined Jesus. And they all went then back up towards Galilee, towards the area that Jesus lived. And they went to a place called Cain. And it was here that we see our first miracle. And this is a relatively well-known miracle of Jesus turning the water into wine. He and his disciples were invited to a wedding, and they ran out of wine, and Jesus turned the water jugs into wine, but not just any old wine, but the best wine. That was his first miracle. That was recorded in John. There are other miracles recorded in the other Gospels. That's the first miracle that we really see from that first year. So if we move on to 26 AD, the following year, Jesus spent his time predominantly up and around Galilee. So we've got the Sea of Galilee in the middle, we've got Nazareth, we've got Cana, and so on. So it's all up in that region. That's where he spent most of that year. And the second miracle that we encounter in the John's Gospel is the healing of the nobleman's son. And basically, they were back in the town or the village of Cain, in that same place that Jesus had turned water into wine. And a nobleman was there, and his son was sick, and he heard Jesus was there, and he came to him and he said, please, can you heal my son? I forgot to put the reference up in here actually, but it's John 4, 46 to 54 if you want to look that up. But really interestingly, before Jesus replied, so the nobleman came to him and said, please can you heal my son? I've heard of the work you did when you were here last time at the wedding. He said, unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told him, you will never believe. And then he went and he healed this nobleman's son. So it's a kind of interesting thing to say before is his first response. Again, we're going to pick this up a little bit later, but just to kind of get your head around all these different miracles that he performed. Moving on, Jesus spent a number of time, quite a bit of time, in and around Galilee and Nazareth, and the other Gospels really show us the other miracles that he was conducting around that time. There's a man who was sick and unclean, with an unclean spirit that he healed. Simon's wife's mother lay sick. He healed a man with leprosy and a paralytic man, and those have all been documented in all the other Gospels. John's Gospel really focuses on these 7 core miracles, which we're going through now. So, Jesus then went down to Jerusalem, and he went down for Passover, which is actually something that Jesus would typically have done on an annual basis. It's a Jewish festival. And it was here that he conducted his third miracle. And this was where he was at the pool, and there was a man who was sick, and he needed somebody to take him down into the water, and he thought that would heal him, but he had no relatives. And Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your bed, and walk." And at that point he was healed. He went to the Jewish authorities and told them all of the things that Jesus had done. So Jesus at this time was starting to have interaction with Jewish authorities. People were starting to realise that he was doing something a little bit different, and they were questioning about this, and they were saying, what is this all about? So that was his third miracle. And again, there was lots of other things happening at this time. Jesus was healing in the synagogue. He preached the Sermon on the Mount, which is quite famous. The centurion's servant, and he raised the dead son at Nina as well. So lots of other things were happening around this time, okay, as Jesus headed back up to the Galilee area again. So it was in and around this area that he conducted his fourth miracle, that again is recorded in the book of John. And this was feeding the 5,000. I think pretty much everybody have heard of this, where there's 5,000 people, 5 loaves and 2 fish, and Jesus fed everybody with that. Up and around that area again, Jesus then performed his fifth miracle that was recorded in John, and this was when he walked on the water. So some of his disciples went out on a boat, and he walked on the water towards them. Again, really just showing the power and authority that God has in Jesus. And I think hopefully all of these miracles you'll see that they're kind of showing God's authority and God's power through Jesus. Again, I'm sure a number of you are very familiar with these, but it's just interesting to put it into the perspective of John's Gospel. So, moving on, we're still up in the area of Galilee. Again, lots of other Gospels showed all of a number of other miracles, feeding 4,000, heals the blind man, he rebukes demons. All of this stuff is happening up in that region of Galilee. And then we move to the following year, 27 AD. And this is the last year really of his public ministry. And he's up in the area of Galilee, and he heads down to Jerusalem. And we're getting ready for our 6th miracle. And this is where we've picked up John, this series of John at Elim. So we are... this was the first miracle in the series that we looked at. So his 6th miracle was there was a blind man, and he obviously couldn't see, and Jesus spat in the soil, made it mud, put that in his eyes, and the man could see. And he said, "I was blind, but now I could see." So Jesus was in Jerusalem performing these miracles, and the Jewish authorities were becoming aware of what he was doing. And throughout the book of John, as we've seen through this series, there's been lots of discussions, debates with the Jewish authorities about who Jesus actually is. And a lot of these happened at the temple. So this was the temple, and Jesus would have been within these temple courts discussing and debating who he was and who he's claiming to be with these Jewish leaders. And this is kind of where we pick up the story. You might remember I said there were 7 miracles in John. The 7th miracle is in the next few chapters, so unfortunately we don't quite get there. But I'd encourage everybody actually to read John, to understand the miracles that Jesus did, and to see the context that all of this actually sits. So, where do we pick up our story? From last week, Jesus was in the temple courts, and he said... the Jewish leaders said to him, "How long do you keep us in doubt? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly." And I've paraphrased this quite a bit. I've just kind of kept the core lines out. Please read it, John 10:22 to 30. Sorry, I missed off the 10 there in the reference. And ultimately he said, "I and my Father are one." Okay, so this is where we picked up. So he's having this conversation, and the Jewish people are saying, "Just tell us plainly, who are you?" And he has said it as plainly as he can. And this is where we pick up our reading. That again, the Jewish opponents picked up stones to stone him. Okay, so they were obviously not happy with the response. This was the response that they wanted, to be able to stone him, because he was, as we read in a minute, he was blaspheming against him. He was... going against the Jewish law at the time by claiming that he was God. So they picked up their stones. Notice it actually says, again his Jewish opponents picked up his stone. So this wasn't the first time, and actually I think it was in John 8 that they tried to stone him previously for something very similar. So they picked up the stones to stone him. And Jesus responds, "I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of these do you stone me?" And as I just mentioned, they said, "We're not stoning you for any of those works, but it's for blasphemy." because you're claiming to be God, and you are saying that, and you are really just a mere man. So they've picked up their stones. We can imagine this slight altercation that's about to happen or happening, and Jesus answers them in this quite confusing and slightly bizarre way. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was reading this, just myself, I'd probably get to these few verses, I would probably read them and I think, I don't really understand what that means. I do get that Jesus is claiming to be one with the Father, but I kind of get the rest of the passage, but I don't really understand what this little bit in the middle is here. But let's try and understand it. Let's try and understand and make sense of it. So at least we do know what that means. Okay, so Jesus answered them, "Is it not written in your law, I have said you are gods?" If he called them gods, to whom the word of God came, and the scriptures cannot be set aside, what about the one whom the Father set apart as his very own, and sent into the world? Why then do you accuse me of blasphemy, because I said I'm God's son? Okay, so it doesn't really make a huge amount of sense, does it? But I think it was really a theological argument that Jesus was making, and a bit of a distraction. If you think about the scene that we're actually kind of imagining, that was written down, was that people are picking up stones ready to stone Jesus. Okay, so he is providing a theological argument, a theological debate about why they shouldn't do this, but possibly is also part of a distraction technique. But let's understand it a bit more fully. So Jesus answered, "Is it not written in your law?" Well, what does that mean? Well, at the time, and the way that the Jews would have understood this, the law was the 5 books of Moses. Now, the 5 books of Moses are the first 5 books of the Bible, made up of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And in particular, we're kind of referencing Exodus, and I'll kind of show where that comes from in a minute. Okay, so going back, so we understand that the law is the book of Moses, in particular Exodus, because he says, "I have said you are gods." Now, this is God speaking at this point in time, okay? Because it's a quote mark. So in your law, God said, "I have said you are gods." Well, that doesn't really make very much sense, does it? Why was God, singular uppercase God, say that we humans are gods lowercase plural? That doesn't really make sense, does it? But let's go back into Exodus. Well, let's go into Exodus. In Exodus 4:16, this is Aaron, said, "We'll speak to the people for you, and it will be as if you were God to him." Exodus 7:1 says, "So the Lord said to Moses, 'See, I have made you as God to Pharaoh. Aaron and your brothers shall be your prophets.'" So basically, God is saying to Aaron and to Moses, who were at the time that these books were written, the law was kind of in and around them, "I have made you as gods," as if you were God. Okay, so this is starting to make sense. Okay, so God has said basically as if you were a god. So maybe that's why it's lowercase and plural, because it's maybe referring to more than one person, and obviously it's not uppercase singular. It's not the God. It's lowercase plural. Now, actually, we can go a little bit deeper, and Psalm 82 really provides the answer that we're looking for here. Psalm 82. I'll read most of it out. This psalm was written kind of to the leaders of Israel, to the judges at the time, and it says, "God presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods." Here's that reference again. "How long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked? Defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hands of the wicked. The gods know nothing. They understand nothing. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said you are gods. You are all the sons of the Most High. But you will die like mere mortals. You will fall like every other ruler. Rise up, O God, the judge of the earth, for the nations are your inheritance. So here we can see that he is talking about the judge among the gods. So these gods are actually just the rulers of the day. And that these gods really know nothing. We are kind of mere humans relative to actually God on high. And we will fall like every other ruler. And finally saying, rise up, O God, uppercase singular, the actual God of the Bible. So Psalm 82, hopefully, when we put all this together, it's starting to make a bit more sense. Okay, so the law is from Moses' law from Exodus. I've said you're gods. He's talking about human leaders and rulers at the time. Okay, and basically what he's saying is if God, uppercase singular God, referred to us as gods, human as gods, can then not God, uppercase singular, also say that his son is here? I am God's son. I think John Piper put it probably much better. And I think that's what I'm trying to remember. If God uses the term gods for something less than God, might it not be feasible that he would use the term Son of God for the one whom he sent into the world? And this is basically this theological argument that Jesus is making at the time when he's about to be stoned. So I think it is a bit of a theological argument. I haven't gone a huge amount of depth into it initially, and I'm sure you could look at it much more in terms of a theological side, but I think really it's a bit of a distraction. Remember, he's about to be stoned. So, but then Jesus gives them a chance. So he says, okay, if you don't believe what I'm saying, if you don't believe that I am God's son because I said it, do you believe the works that I do? Because if I'm not God's son, then how can I do the works? And this is basically what he's saying. He's kind of giving them a last chance, a second chance to actually believe him. If you don't believe what I'm saying, please just believe what I can do and what you've seen I do. But as we know, they don't. And they try and seize him. But he escapes their grasp. Quite amazingly, if you think about that temple drawing, that temple picture I showed, I don't know how he quite escaped their grasp and got out, but he did. And this is when Jesus escapes and he leaves Jerusalem and he heads back to where we started at the beginning of John. Jesus went back to the Jordan where John had been baptizing in the early days. And there he stayed. And many people came to him and they said, though John never performed a sign, all that he said about this man was true, and many believed. And I think we've got this really interesting kind of paradox about the book of John. Because if you remember, when we went back to the nobleman's son who was healed, Jesus said, unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told them, you will never believe. Yet, interestingly, at the very end of this passage, I mean, the passage could have ended there. Jesus could have escaped, gone back off to Galilee or wherever he was going next. But no, the writer put in, though John, this is John the Baptist, never performed a sign, all that John said about this man was true. And many people believed. So we've got this interesting paradox. Are we meant to, is it because we see signs and wonders that we will believe in God, believe in God and who Jesus is? Or, even if those signs and wonders are not there, can we still believe in Jesus? And of course we can. So this is really interesting thing, and I think we'd all hopefully agree that it's got to be a mixture of both, hasn't it? For some people, the signs and wonders is really what helps them see, what helps them understand. If we look at the nobleman's son, after he saw the miracle of his son being healed, he and his family believed. But at the same time, where John the Baptist had been baptizing and just speaking the truth, many people believed, even though they never saw anything. And I think that's kind of quite amazing. So where does that leave us today? How can we kind of think about that? Well, I think the first thing is do we actually believe Jesus' claim that I and my Father are one? If we're in this situation, so I've kind of exposed us to the book of John, a number of miracles, and I think really the question is, do we believe that? Do we believe that Jesus who is who he's claimed to be, the Son of God? Was he just a nice man, or was he more than that? And I think that's a real challenge. We as Christians believe that we are sinful, that all humans are sinful, and that Jesus was perfect, and he took away the sin and enabled us to have a relationship with God. And it's really all summed up by this verse, again in John's Gospel. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. So I'd really encourage you, if you don't know Jesus, think about that. Hopefully somebody has told you some truth that you can look up, or maybe you need to ask God for a sign of some sort. So please do explore that and have a chat to somebody who you came with. Otherwise, though, I think for people who do know who Jesus is, it's got to be this paradox, this mix between these signs and wonders and speaking the truth. And how can we as Christians actually go about that? And what's the best way? And I think it can be really challenging. But I was really encouraged by the Love in Action that happened a couple of weeks ago. And it was, for those who don't know, the church, I'm afraid I wasn't actually there. We had something else going on with the family. But people from the church went out into Loughborough and just gave flowers and things in and around Loughborough around Mother's Day. And we got this really nice message. One of Chrissy's friends posted this on Facebook. And I'll just read it because it might be a little bit small. But while sat in the park today, a lady approached me and she gave me a little bunch of flowers. She said she's giving them out to all the mums as it's Mother's Day tomorrow. She then told me that Jesus loves me, God understands how hard parent is. I'm not religious at all, and the cynic that I am prepared myself to be preached at, asked to join a church or give some money to something, but nothing of the sort happened. She was just genuinely trying to do something nice. It's nice to be reminded that there are still some tiny pockets of good in this crazy world. And I think that's just really encouraging. I think that was obviously really encouraging for her. I think it shows just that Jesus loves people and that we can do it just in a really nice way. And the amazing thing is that this has obviously been shared on Facebook, and it obviously really meant something to her, which I think is just really really nice to see. And so whether or not it's speaking the truth, performing signs and wonders, or exploring that, I think the key is to get out and tell people. As it said about John the Baptist, he just told people who Jesus was, and that's what enabled them to believe. So I think to sum this up, to wrap up, Jesus performed many miracles during his 3 years of his ministry, really to show his power and his authority and who he was, that he was God's Son. The Jews were constantly trying to trap him. They were threatened by his authority, and they were worried that they were going to lose their own authority and their own power at the time. In this verse particularly, they're trying to trap him, trying to get him to say that he was God's Son so they could then stone him. But this wasn't his time. His time had not yet come when he was to die. And obviously Easter's next week, so we'll be learning all about that, what happens at the Easter story when he was crucified and rose again. At the time, he presented this theological argument. He presented a theological argument. Maybe it's a bit of a distraction, maybe. But he still gave them one last chance to believe, saying, if you don't believe what I'm saying, just believe what I've done. Look at these miracles that I performed. Please just believe that. Obviously, we know they turned away, but I think there is really encouragement out there. Just that little bit at the end about John the Baptist, he was just speaking the truth, telling people who Jesus was, and many believed in him. And I think hopefully we can take something away from that, and just encourage you to share the good news this week. Thank you very much.